was an experiment to find out. But then when the war ended, they said they couldn't drop it, and that was when it was diverted to be dropped on.
There was an interesting story associated with that too. When we found what the bombs were, and we decided to move them to the United States, we sent 3 bombers to move each bomb, and all 3 of the crews were briefed to believe that they had the real bomb and the others had dummies. So the crews never knew which bomb was the real one.
You're talking about the German ones now.
The German ones. When we brought the German ones from Peenemünde back to Offutt Air Force Base in headquarters SAC.
Okay.
And then they were only there for a week at headquarters SAC before we did the same thing and transported them out to Tinian Island. And a week later, we dropped one on Hiroshima, the plutonium bomb, and the uranium bomb on Hiroshima, and dropped the plutonium bomb on Nagasaki.
This was something me and Wendelle were talking about just before we went on the air. Is it possible that the bomb we dropped on Hiroshima could have been one of the German bombs? Because Wendelle thinks there wasn't enough time after the development with the Manhattan Project.
3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks to have got it and then transported it
and drop it.
So it's an interesting theory. Who knows? That maybe the bomb we dropped was the one of the Germans.
I'm going to, on a CD I've got, I'm going to give it to you right after the program here that has pictures of the German bomb. The one that they call the Fat Man, and the picture is identical to the pictures we took of the fat boy that we dropped on Hiroshima.
Because I didn't think about that. If they did have to get it to the island in those days, things took a lot longer.
10 days. And we only had 3 weeks from the time of our test explosion until we dropped it on Hiroshima.
Yeah. Interesting theory, but then who knows? There's so much of this that was kept secret.
Still kept secret.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a whole lot we'll never know. But that's why you have an inquiring mind. You're like me. You're full of curiosity. You want to know these things. Okay. But anyway, how did you get into the UFOs then?
Well,
back when you said
at that time we had a mandatory rotational program. We had 2 years in the zone of interior, which is the United States, and 2 years overseas. And after 2 years in the zone of interior, you became vulnerable for an overseas assignment. And you would get one within a short time, and then that would be another 2-year period. Then you'd rotate back to the States again. So I was reaching the end of my 2-year ZI, zone of interior assignment, and going to be assigned overseas. And when it came, it was assigned to Alaska, which was considered an overseas base at the time.
Okay.
It was not a state.
It
wasn't a state then. It was territory.
Yeah.
And when I got to Alaska, I found that my job there, my additional duty, was to supervise a team of highly technical, highly classified civilians, 6 of them, from my home base at Wright Field, from the Air Technical Intelligence Center, that were installing special equipment aboard the B-29s that were flying their target profile missions on Russia. Remember, every B-29 crew had to fly a simulated bomb drop once a year. And they flew all of the correct legs up to the last change of direction, then they'd change that back and drop it on the simulated drop on our side of the frontier.
Okay.
So since that was already funded and the airplanes were flying and the crews were being paid, there were piggyback programs that were attached to that requirement. One of them was to look for this anomalous aerial phenomena.
They already knew there was strange things out there.
They knew that, yes, and those B-29s were having an event, experiencing an event about twice a month. The airplanes went out every night, sometimes more than one, on their profile missions, and only about 1 out of 15 flights or so had an event to report. When they reported the event, the crews returned to Anchorage, Alaska. We separated the crew members, one from each other, put them in separate rooms, and then they were interrogated by experts, and their testimony taken down in shorthand and packaged with the film rolls, the cartridge cassettes, and the rolls of tape and everything from the equipment we put aboard. Now, we put aboard the B-29 surge detectors in each of the electrical systems. There's 5 out of B-29.
Yeah.
We put radio frequency detectors that would read the entire radio frequency spectrum, scan it, stop on the strongest signal, record it for 30 seconds, then cancel it, scan again for the next strongest, 30 seconds, cancel that till they covered them all, then it would start over, do it again for the whole 14-hour flight.
So they knew when something was out of the ordinary.
We also put magnetic detectors aboard the airplane to measure ambient changes in the magnetic field. We put thermal detectors that look for changes in ambient temperature in the airplanes. All those things were recorded at one time or another. More cameras to take the pictures, opportunity cameras. There's a camera in every gun position on the B-29 already. We gave them 4x5 press cameras, 35mm hand cameras. All this was part of the kit of equipment that went aboard each B-29 every night they went out on target profile missions.
So this started your interest in the UFOs.
I wasn't allowed to possess anything that came back. It was all packaged in a metal locker, chained to an officer's wrist, and flown to Washington that night, and what didn't go to Washington had to be shredded and burned that same day, destroyed. So I
This
never got
shows
to see
that
it.
Washington has had information for a long time.
And you know, an interesting thing, in that my superiors thought that we were looking for a Russian development, and I was convinced that it was extraterrestrial, truly extraterrestrial visitation. From what I was looking at, it looked extraterrestrial. And I couldn't persuade my superiors that it was extraterrestrial. They kept insinuating that they thought it was a Russian development. From the Air Technical Intelligence Center's work, I couldn't see how the Russians could have succeeded in making that big a jump in aviation technology. And so I didn't accept their idea. But now, after years of research on the German discs, I find that when the war ended, when the Russians drove the Germans back into Germany, they crossed the frontier between Russia and Poland before the Germans successfully evacuated all the Kugelblitz research bases, those 9 symbols on the map. The Russians captured one intact with all the staff, with the work in progress, all the machinery, and the families that lived there. They lived underground with the project, working it. And they took the whole thing up into northern Siberia to Lake Taymyr, T-Y-M-Y-R, where they reorganized, they set the whole thing back up there in 1945. So they could have been building some of these vehicles that we were photographing or experiencing contact with on our profile missions, and I had no idea that was going on at the time.
But the only way was because they were able to reconstruct. They had the scientists, they
had everything to continue the German program just as it was, and in 1941 the Germans were successfully flying these discs, the first Hannibals.
There's a lot people don't know.
But
you know, it gets to the point that, you know, I don't believe anything coming out of Washington anymore. I tell people, think for themselves. That there is so much they don't know about. But,
or that we're kept from knowing about.
Yeah, I know. But your interest you've kept up with the UFO field all these years.
Yeah, I just published a report on the Nazis flying discs that says 300 pages. It has over 100 photographs of the German discs, many of them in flight, diagrams, pictures of craft in development, and there was a young man, a computer expert, you call him a computer nerd today. Lives up in the Chicago area that was continually trying to break into black budget projects. He finally broke into one that involved the German disc research and the development of the Hannibal series of craft, and in searching those records, he found that we brought some back to the United States at the end of the war that were unfinished, and we successfully finished some of them out in the White Sands Missile Test Area, where they had set up a special project for this, and that we had continued the developments, and he discovered some research test sites that they were being tested at, and he watched and calculated a date for a test and drove out there and to stake it out. And he succeeded in getting pictures of one of our later developments. And then he got another test site. Then he picked up a third, then a fourth, then a fifth, and he got a series of photographs of our later developments of the captured technology that we got from Germany. And those are in the disc.
And, you know, we know with the UFO field, I've been involved with it for over 20 years, that they keep telling us, oh, there's nothing to it, you know, and they try to make everybody appear like they're crazy. But we know when we've been involved with it so long, there is a lot to it. And we keep finding out more, and you seem to be right in the middle of all of this. But
Is there one case that you've investigated that you think is your most important or the most interesting, or are there many?
Well,
one you want to talk about?
Yeah, one that stands out in my mind is, first, the Pleiades case, but that's pretty well known now, was a case of contacts from reticulum, where it all began with a born-again Christian that would have laughed at anybody trying to tell him a UFO story. He wouldn't read the reports in the newspaper. He didn't collect any magazines. If anybody showed him a picture, he'd laugh it away.
Is he in the States, or where was he?
He was living in South Carolina, North Charleston, South Carolina.
The deep South, okay.
Yeah, in the Bible Belt, where they don't even allow movie theaters to open on Sunday,
okay.
Blue Laws country.
So he's a real dyed-in-the-wool.
Oh, yeah, and a real born-again Christian and a very religious man. His family attended church regularly, 3 or 4 times a week, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He was a deacon in his church. He passed the collection plate. He taught the Sunday school. He helped keep the church records. So he was pretty high in the order in the church hierarchy in his town there.
Okay.
Southern Baptist Conference Church. So after his contacts, he saw a pinkish orange light in the sky that kept coming closer. So then he thought it was paying attention to him, and then one night, and it was flying a strange pattern. It flies a pattern with sharp angular turns, changes of direction like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was easily recognized because of its flight pattern. No airplane can fly that way. So a neighbor lady came to his little house trailer, to borrow a cup of sugar one night, and his wife saw the craft out there flying these strange triangular patterns. She says, "Bill, your friend is out here." He went out and looked over his wife's and the neighbor's head and saw it, and he says, "I think I'll go out there and see if I can get a better, closer look at it."
Uh-huh.
So he put on his jacket, put binoculars over his shoulder, and went out into the night. It's about 9 o'clock at night to get closer to it. He walked across the ditch and up onto the railroad track that ran above the trailer park there. And he was standing on the railroad track watching it through the binoculars and trying to focus on it because it was moving so erratically it was hard to keep it in view.
Yeah.
And then he saw it drop like a stone. And he thought it dropped into the Ashley River. And he's trying to focus the binoculars to see where it splashed in the river. And as he was doing that, it swooped in and filled the sky in front of him like that, so close and so fast, he thought it was going to knock him down. So he shied back like that, caught his foot on the rail, and began to fall. And he didn't fall. He put his hand down to catch it. There were jagged rocks along the railroad track.
Yeah. And
he never hit the rocks. He didn't feel them at all. And he saw tall grass blowing away from him in waves. Then he looked up, and he's in a beam of blue light going up into the air with a kind of an electrical tugging like that.
Yeah.
And when he reached the bottom of the craft, he fainted, woke up on an examining table aboard.
I've heard of the blue light. I know about these things. But how did he explain all of this?
Well,
the light in the sky.
Yeah, he couldn't explain. He thought that it was a Navy vehicle and air vehicle under test, and he kept calling the Navy and telling them, because they have their naval storage facilities. He kept calling them and telling them your test vehicle is easily seen. If you got a secret project going, everybody can see it, and you ought to be more careful about this.
Okay, because I was wondering if he didn't believe in this and he saw this erratic.
He thought it was either an Air Force or a Navy